You reheated your leftovers again tonight. Same rice, same chicken, same routine you followed for years. But what if I told you that one of the most common foods sitting in your fridge right now turns into a completely different substance the moment you microwave it a second time? Not spoiled, not smelly, looks perfectly fine, tastes normal. But according to cancer researchers, reheating it wrong could be quietly working against your body every single time you do it. Today, I'm revealing 4 everyday foods you should never reheat again. And the last one might shock you because there's a good chance you're eating it almost daily without knowing the risk. I'm Dr. William Lee, a Harvard-trained physician and medical researcher. For decades, I've studied how everyday foods affect the body and help prevent disease. As the author of Eat to Beat Disease, I base my health advice on scientific research, not myths or internet trends. That's why I want to explain why reheating certain foods may not always be as safe as you think. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which 4 foods you should stop reheating immediately, and more importantly, why each one carries a hidden risk that most people have no idea about. This isn't about throwing away your leftovers or living in fear of your fridge. It's about understanding what actually happens at a molecular level when heat is applied to certain foods more than once. Some of these risks are bacterial, some are chemical, and one of them is something doctors have been quietly warning about for years, but almost nobody talks about it publicly. Stick around till the end, because food number 4 is something most people eat almost every single day without ever questioning it. And once you hear why it made this list, you'll probably think twice before microwaving it again. If you find this information valuable, consider subscribing because we break down real health science like this every week, backed by actual doctors and research, not internet myths. Let's get into food number 1. Let's start with something almost every household has in the fridge right now: leftover rice. It seems harmless. It's bland, it's filling, and reheating it feels like the most normal thing in the world. But rice is actually one of the most misunderstood foods when it comes to food safety, and doctors have been warning about this for years. Here's what most people don't realize. The danger with rice doesn't come from the reheating process itself. It comes from what happens before you even put it in the microwave. Raw rice can naturally contain spores of a bacteria called Bacillus cereus. These spores are incredibly tough. They can survive the initial cooking process because they're built to withstand heat. Cooking your rice doesn't kill them, it just puts them to sleep. The real problem starts after the rice is cooked. If you leave that rice sitting out at room temperature for too long, even just a couple of hours, those dormant spores wake up. They start multiplying rapidly, and as they multiply, they release toxins into the rice. And here's the part that surprises most people. These toxins are heat resistant. That means even if you reheat the rice until it's steaming hot, you are not destroying the toxin. You're only killing the bacteria. The poison they already produce stays behind. So you could be reheating your rice perfectly, following every instruction, making sure it's piping hot all the way through, and still consume a toxin that causes vomiting, stomach cramps, and food poisoning symptoms within hours. This is sometimes referred to as fried rice syndrome because it's so commonly linked to restaurant rice that's been sitting out for extended periods before being reheated and served. Now, does this mean rice causes cancer? No, that's not the concern here. The concern is repeated exposure to bacterial toxins and the stress this puts on your digestive system and immune response over time. Chronic low-grade inflammation caused by repeated foodborne illness is something researchers increasingly link to long-term health complications, including conditions that compromise immune function. So, what's the actual fix? It's simpler than you think. The key isn't avoiding reheated rice altogether, it's about how you handle it before reheating. If you're going to save rice for later, the goal is to get it from hot to cold as quickly as possible. Leaving it out on the counter for hours while it slowly cools down is exactly the window of time those bacteria need to multiply. Doctors and food safety experts recommend refrigerating rice within 1 hour of cooking, not leaving it out through an entire meal, dessert, and conversation before finally putting it away. Once refrigerated properly, rice is generally safe to reheat once, as long as it's heated thoroughly and consumed immediately, not left to sit out again afterward. Another good habit: don't keep reheating the same batch of rice multiple times. Every time you cool and reheat it, you're creating another opportunity for bacteria to grow if it's not handled quickly. One reheat, eaten right away, is the safest approach. This is exactly the kind of hidden risk Dr. Lee points to when he talks about food safety. It's rarely about the food itself being bad, and almost always about how we store and handle it after cooking. Rice isn't the enemy, time and temperature are. And if you think rice was surprising, wait until you hear about the next food on this list, because it's sitting in almost every fridge in the world right now, and the mistake people make with it is even more common. Chicken might be the single most reheated food on the planet. Meal preppers swear by it, gym goers eat it 5 days a week, and almost every household has a container of leftover chicken sitting in the fridge right now. It's lean, it's high in protein, and it feels like the safe choice compared to red meat. But according to doctors, chicken is actually one of the trickiest foods to reheat safely, and most people are doing it wrong without realizing it. Here's the first issue. Chicken is dense. Unlike rice or vegetables, chicken doesn't heat evenly, especially in a microwave. What happens is the outer layer gets extremely hot very quickly, while the inside, especially if it's a thicker cut like a breast or thigh, often stays lukewarm. Visually, it looks done. It's steaming, it smells cooked, but the core temperature never actually reaches the point needed to kill off bacteria that may have developed during storage. This creates a false sense of safety. You see steam, you assume it's hot enough, and you eat it. But if the internal temperature hasn't consistently hit a safe level throughout the entire piece, any bacteria present, like salmonella or listeria, which can develop during improper storage, doesn't get fully eliminated. This is one of the most common causes of mild, unexplained food poisoning that people brush off as stomach bug without ever connecting it to the chicken they reheated for lunch. But there's a second layer to this that most people have never heard of, and it's less about bacteria and more about the food itself changing structurally. Chicken is extremely high in protein, and when protein is repeatedly exposed to heat, cooked once, cooled, then reheated, the protein structure begins to break down further each time. This process, called protein oxidation, doesn't just affect texture, making the chicken rubbery or dry. Some researchers, including those studying food-based inflammation, have raised concerns that repeated high heat exposure to animal protein can produce compounds that place additional oxidative stress on the body when consumed frequently over time. To be clear, this isn't about panicking over a single reheated chicken breast. It's about a pattern. If reheating chicken multiple times per week, sometimes even reheating the same batch 2 or 3 times, becomes a long-term habit, the cumulative effect on digestive comfort and inflammation markers is something doctors like Dr. Lee point to as worth paying attention to, especially for people already managing chronic inflammatory conditions. So, how do you actually reheat chicken the right way without giving it up completely? The fix comes down to 2 things: even heating and one-time reheating. Instead of microwaving chicken in short, uneven bursts, cutting it into smaller, uniform pieces before reheating helps heat distribute more evenly throughout, rather than leaving a cold center. Using an oven or stovetop with a lid, even if it takes a few extra minutes, tends to heat chicken more evenly than a microwave. It's also worth using a simple food thermometer if you're someone who meal preps often, checking that reheated chicken reaches a safe internal temperature all the way through removes the guesswork entirely. And just like with rice, the goal should be to reheat chicken once, eat it fully, and avoid repeatedly cooling and reheating the same batch multiple times throughout the week. Chicken isn't inherently dangerous, and this isn't a reason to cut it from your diet, but it is a reason to be more mindful about portioning your meal prep into single-serving containers rather than reheating from one large batch over and over again across several days. Now, here's where things get more surprising, because the next food on this list isn't meat at all. It's something people consider one of the healthiest things they can eat, and reheating it might be quietly working against the very reason they're eating it in the first place. This one surprises almost everyone, because spinach has this reputation as one of the healthiest foods you can possibly eat. It's packed with iron, vitamins, antioxidants, the kind of food nutritionists tell you to eat more of, not less. So when doctors say, be careful reheating it, people are usually shocked because it feels like the opposite of what you'd expect from a superfood. But here's what's actually happening. Spinach, along with other leafy greens like kale, beet greens, and even celery, naturally contains high levels of nitrates. On their own, nitrates aren't dangerous. In fact, in moderate amounts, they're linked to some health benefits like improved blood flow. The problem isn't the nitrates themselves. It's what happens to them when the food is cooked, then cooled, then reheated. When spinach is cooked and left to sit, especially at room temperature or even in the fridge for an extended period, those nitrates can begin converting into nitrites. And when that nitrite-rich food is then reheated, especially in a microwave, that conversion process can accelerate further. Under certain conditions, nitrites can also transform into compounds called nitrosamines, which researchers have studied for their potential link to cellular damage when consumed in significant amounts over long periods of time. Now, it's important to be precise here, because this isn't about creating panic over a bowl of spinach. The conversion of nitrates into concerning compounds generally requires specific conditions: extended time at room temperature, repeated reheating, or improper storage, rather than simply microwaving spinach once, immediately after cooking it. The risk isn't the vegetable, it's the pattern of how long it sits around before and after it's reheated. This is actually a concern that's been raised specifically about baby food and pureed vegetables in the past, where infants have shown sensitivity to nitrite exposure from improperly stored greens. Adults have more tolerance, but the underlying mechanism doctors are pointing to is the same. The longer cooked leafy greens sit before being reheated, and the more times they're reheated, the more opportunity there is for that nitrate to nitrite conversion to occur. Dr. Lee's research often emphasizes that vegetables lose potency and can sometimes shift in composition the longer they're stored after cooking. Fresh is always going to be more beneficial than something that's been sitting in a container for 3 or 4 days, reheated once or twice already, especially with leafy greens compared to something more heat-stable like root vegetables. So, what's the practical fix here? If you're someone who meal preps big batches of spinach, kale, or similar greens for the week, try to cook smaller portions more frequently, instead of one large batch sitting in the fridge for days. If you do have leftover cooked greens, aim to reheat them only once and try to consume them within a day or two of cooking, rather than letting them sit for the full week. Another simple option, if you're worried about this at all, is leaning toward eating leafy greens raw or lightly steamed fresh, rather than relying heavily on reheated batches. A quick sauté of fresh spinach takes barely 3 minutes, so it's not always necessary to rely on reheating leftovers when fresh preparation is nearly just as fast. To be completely clear, spinach and leafy greens remain incredibly healthy foods, and nobody is suggesting you should stop eating them. This is simply about being aware of storage time and reheating frequency, rather than assuming a vegetable is automatically safe just because it's a vegetable. And now for the food that ties this entire list together, because unlike rice, chicken, or spinach, this next one is something almost everyone eats nearly every single day, often without a second thought. And the reason doctors flag it might be the most overlooked one on this entire list. Eggs are probably the most eaten breakfast food on the planet. Boiled, scrambled, fried, made into an omelet, they're cheap, high in protein, and a staple in almost every kitchen. Which is exactly why this next warning surprises so many people, because reheating eggs is something almost everyone does without a second thought. Whether it's leftover scrambled eggs from breakfast, or a boiled egg pulled straight from the fridge. Here's the core issue. Eggs are extremely high in protein, and just like chicken, that protein structure changes when exposed to heat multiple times. But eggs have an added complication. They're also very sensitive to bacterial growth, if not stored properly. And they have a unique way of reacting when reheated compared to other foods. When eggs are cooked and then cooled, then reheated again, the protein bonds tighten and break down further, which is part of why reheated eggs often turn rubbery, dry, or develop that slightly off, sulfur-like smell. That smell isn't just a texture issue, it's a sign that the protein structure has already broken down significantly, and repeated exposure to heat accelerates this process even more. But the bigger concern doctors point to is bacterial. Eggs, especially if not refrigerated quickly after cooking, can develop salmonella bacteria fairly easily. And just like with chicken, reheating in a microwave often creates uneven heating. The outside gets hot, but the inside, especially in something like a boiled egg or a thick omelet, may not reach a high enough temperature to fully kill off bacteria that developed during storage. This is part of why doctors and food safety researchers have specifically flagged eggs as a food that's often reheated incorrectly. Most people don't realize that eggs need to be reheated more carefully than almost anything else on this list, because the margin between safe and risky is much smaller with eggs than with something like rice. There's also a compound-related concern that Dr. Lee's research touches on: repeated heating of cholesterol-containing foods, which eggs are naturally high in, can lead to oxidation of that cholesterol. Oxidized cholesterol compounds have been studied for their potential role in contributing to oxidative stress and inflammation in the body, which over time, some research suggests, may play a role in cardiovascular strain, separate from the cholesterol in eggs itself, being the primary concern people usually focus on. To be clear, eating eggs, even leftover eggs, isn't inherently dangerous. This is about frequency and method, not eliminating eggs from your diet entirely. The actual fix comes down to a few simple habits. First, refrigerate leftover eggs quickly, ideally within an hour of cooking, rather than leaving them out on the counter. Second, if you're reheating eggs, do it gently and evenly. A low oven or stovetop with a splash of water or broth tends to heat eggs more evenly than a microwave, which tends to create hot and cold spots. Third, and probably most important, avoid reheating eggs more than once. If you have leftover eggs, aim to eat them within a day, reheated a single time, rather than repeatedly warming up the same batch over several days. So, there you have it. The 4 foods doctors say you should be far more careful reheating than you probably have been: rice, chicken, spinach, and eggs. None of these foods are bad. The real issue in every single case comes down to how long they sit before reheating, how many times they're reheated, and whether they're heated evenly all the way through. Before we wrap up, here are 5 quick rules that apply to almost anything you reheat, not just the 4 foods we covered today. Keep these in mind and you'll dramatically reduce your risk with any leftovers. Rule 1. Cool it fast. Don't let cooked food sit out at room temperature for more than an hour. The longer it sits, the more time bacteria have to multiply before it even goes in the fridge. Rule 2. Reheat once, not repeatedly. Every cycle of cooling and reheating creates another window for bacteria to grow and for protein structures to break down further. Portion your meals into single servings so you're only reheating what you'll actually eat. Rule 3. Heat it evenly, all the way through. Steam on the outside doesn't mean it's safe on the inside. Stir food halfway through microwaving or use the stovetop or oven for thicker items like chicken and eggs. Rule 4. Use a thermometer if you meal prep often. It removes the guesswork and tells you exactly when food has reached a safe internal temperature. Rule 5. When in doubt, eat it fresh. If a food is naturally more sensitive, like leafy greens or eggs, leaning toward fresh preparation over reheating leftovers is always the safer choice. None of this means giving up meal prep or convenience. It just means being a little more intentional about how you store and reheat what you've already cooked. So let's quickly recap the 4 foods you should be far more careful reheating. Rice, because of heat-resistant toxins from bacteria that survive cooking. Chicken, because uneven heating can leave bacteria alive at the core, and repeated reheating breaks down protein structure. Spinach and leafy greens, because of that nitrate to nitrite conversion when they sit around too long before or after reheating. And eggs, the one almost everyone eats daily, where both bacterial risk and cholesterol oxidation come into play with repeated heating. None of these foods are your enemy. The real lesson here, straight from research doctors like Dr. William Lee have spent years studying, is that how you store and reheat food matters just as much as the food itself. Now, I want to hear from you. Which one of these 4 foods surprised you the most? Drop a comment and let me know, because I read every single one. And if this video gave you something valuable to think about, hit subscribe, because we break down real doctor-backed health information like this every single one. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.